At first glance, Starship Troopers looks like just another loud science fiction war movie. Guns firing non-stop, young soldiers charging into battle, giant alien bugs exploding on screen. Everything about it feels simple, aggressive, and easy to consume. But that simplicity is the trap. Because Starship Troopers is not a movie that asks you to think before you watch it. It waits until after you've been entertained, after you've cheered, laughed, or felt nothing at all, then quietly asks a far more uncomfortable question. What if you didn't misunderstand this movie? What if the real danger was that you understood it perfectly and still enjoyed it? Behind the glossy uniforms, perfect smiles, and endless violence is a film designed to blur the line between satire and propaganda so completely that even its own audience couldn't agree on what they were watching. Some saw a parody, others saw a celebration, and many never realized they were being tested at all. This is not a story about alien bugs. It's a story about how war is sold, how obedience is dressed up as heroism, and how easily entertainment can become recruitment. These are the numbers behind Starship Troopers and why its most disturbing weapon was never on the battlefield. Number 1. Robert Heinlein's Starship Troopers, published in 1959, was never a harmless space adventure. On the surface, it presented a disciplined future where citizenship was earned through military service. But beneath that vision sat an idea that unsettled readers almost immediately. Civic virtue defined by obedience, violence justified as duty, and war treated as moral training. The novel was praised by fans of hard science fiction, yet condemned by others as a thinly veiled endorsement of authoritarian thinking. Some schools banned it outright, labeling its ideology dangerously close to fascism. For decades, Hollywood circled the book but hesitated. Adapting it faithfully meant embracing its politics. Rejecting it risked alienating its fan base. When director Paul Verhoeven encountered Heinlein's novel, he didn't see a heroic future. He saw something far more familiar and far more frightening. After reading only a small portion, he dismissed it as ideological propaganda. But instead of walking away, Verhoeven chose a more subversive path. He would adapt the story not by honoring its beliefs, but by exposing them. What Heinlein wrote, sincerely, Verhoeven would reinterpret as a warning. The film would not argue against militarism directly. It would let audiences experience how seductive it could be. Number 2. The irony is that Starship Troopers did not begin life as Starship Troopers at all. The original screenplay was a generic science fiction action script titled Bug Hunt at Outpost 9. It featured soldiers fighting alien insects, with no political ambition, no satire, and no deeper message. Just weapons, monsters, and survival. For a time, that was all the project was meant to be, a disposable creature feature destined for low expectations. Everything changed when the studio acquired the rights to Heinlein's novel. Suddenly, the script was retrofitted with the book's universe, the mobile infantry, citizenship through service, and a rigid military culture. This fusion created something strange. A simple action script was now wearing the skin of a controversial political novel. Under Verhoeven's direction, that contradiction became intentional. The straightforward bug war remained on the surface, but underneath it sat a critique sharpened by irony. The film became a Trojan horse, spectacle on the outside, ideology on the inside. Audiences would come for the explosions and stay without realizing it inside a satire designed to test their reactions. Number 3. In the mid-1990s, Sony Pictures was in a state of constant executive turnover. Projects changed hands so frequently that long-term oversight barely existed. For Starship Troopers, this chaos became an unexpected shield. To the studio, the film looked like a standard big-budget science fiction war movie. Young, attractive actors, groundbreaking visual effects, endless action. On paper, it was safe. Few executives paid close attention to the tone embedded in the script, the exaggerated propaganda reels, or the unmistakable authoritarian imagery. By the time anyone might have raised serious concerns, the decision-makers had already been replaced. Verhoeven later described this as a rare gift, complete creative freedom wrapped inside studio ignorance. With a massive budget already approved, he was able to push his satire to the edge without interference. What should have been diluted in a boardroom survived intact because no one was watching closely enough. The result was a film that openly mocked militarism while appearing to celebrate it, slipping through the system, not despite its message, but because of how convincingly it hid it. Number 4. Casting Starship Troopers became its own ideological battleground. The studio pushed for recognizable names, actors with proven box office pull who could sell tickets and posters. At different points, Johnny Rico was nearly played by established stars, while Carmen was almost cast with a rising television icon fresh off mainstream success. Paul Verhoeven rejected that logic entirely. He did not want stars with history or emotional baggage. He wanted faces that felt manufactured, clean, symmetrical, flawless. People who looked less like individuals and more like figures lifted from recruitment posters. That decision reshaped the film's meaning. Casper Van Dien, Denise Richards, Dina Meyer, and Neil Patrick Harris weren't chosen because they were the strongest dramatic actors of their generation. They were chosen because they looked perfect, almost unnervingly so. Their beauty felt artificial, polished, and slightly hollow. The casting itself became part of the satire. These weren't soldiers hardened by experience. They were idealized bodies offered up to the machine, young, attractive, replaceable. By the time audiences noticed how shallow these characters seemed, it was already too late. That emptiness was the point. Number 5. Visually, the soldiers of Starship Troopers resemble fashion models more than recruits. Perfect teeth, sculpted faces, immaculate haircuts. Critics mocked the film at the time, comparing it to a teen drama thrown into a war zone, but that criticism misunderstood the design. Verhoeven intentionally framed his characters like propaganda icons. From the mid-20th century, the soldiers were meant to look unreal, too clean, too confident, too beautiful for the brutality they were marching into. Even the age gap added to the distortion, with actors in their 20s portraying characters barely out of high school. This aesthetic wasn't accidental. It reflected how authoritarian systems sell war, not through reality, but through fantasy. Youth is idealized, violence is sanitized, sacrifice is romanticized. The ugliness is hidden behind symmetry and smiles. By making his soldiers look more like mannequins than people, Verhoeven exposed how propaganda flattens humanity. Individual identity dissolves. All that remains is the uniform and the role it demands you play. Number 6. In Heinlein's novel, Dizzy Flores was a minor male character, barely remembered. The film transformed Dizzy into a woman and placed her at the emotional center of the story. Loyal, self-sacrificing, and unwavering, she became the embodiment of devotion within the military system. Early versions of the film leaned into a more complicated emotional dynamic. Carmen pursued her ambitions without apology, Johnny wavered, and Dizzy's love burned quietly in the background. But test audiences reacted harshly. They judged Carmen for choosing career over romance and rejected moral ambiguity. The studio responded by simplifying the emotional landscape. Carmen's agency was reduced. Dizzy's death was elevated into a noble sacrifice. The message became cleaner, safer, and more palatable. This shift revealed an uncomfortable truth beyond the film itself. Even when satire challenges traditional roles, audiences often push back, demanding familiar emotional punishments and rewards. In that sense, the audience didn't just watch Starship Troopers. They helped reshape it, proving how deeply conditioned expectations can override intention. Number 7. When audiences see the scorched alien terrain of Klendathu, they're not looking at a distant planet. They're looking at a real, hostile stretch of Earth. The production chose an unforgiving location whose jagged rock formations and empty horizons felt inhuman enough to sell an alien world. But what looked cinematic on screen became punishing off-camera. Actors were sealed inside heavy armor, helmets, and weapons that trapped heat and restricted movement. Under extreme temperatures, exhaustion became constant. One cast member collapsed from heat stroke and was hospitalized. Others pushed through sunburns, blisters, and dehydration as the terrain tore through boots and skin alike. To keep filming possible, the crew quietly cut ventilation holes into the suits. On screen, the mobile infantry appears overwhelmed by an alien environment. In reality, that desperation wasn't acting. It was physical survival. The irony was brutal and intentional. A film critiquing the fantasy of heroic warfare forced its performers to endure genuine suffering to sell that illusion. The pain was real, the spectacle was staged, and the contrast mirrored the film's core argument perfectly. Number 8. Despite their terrifying presence, the arachnids were never there during filming. Actors fired weapons at empty landscapes, metal poles topped with tennis balls, or nothing at all. Sometimes, they aimed at the director himself as he leapt into frame, screaming and flailing his arms, mimicking the movements of a giant insect. Behind the chaos was a precise system. Veteran effects artist Phil Tippett choreographed how the creatures should move, treating them like living organisms rather than digital monsters. His work guided the visual effects teams, who pushed computer-generated imagery to its limits. Some battle sequences took nearly an entire day to render a single frame. Hundreds of moving parts had to feel organic, coordinated, and relentless. On screen, the bugs appear unstoppable. Behind the scenes, their menace was built from exhaustion, improvisation, and technological strain. The result was a strange contradiction: absolute control behind the camera, total chaos within the story. The bugs weren't just enemies, they were a force designed to make human resistance feel small, futile, and endlessly repeatable. Number 9. The violence of Starship Troopers nearly broke the system meant to regulate it. Exploding bodies, severed limbs, soldiers torn apart in seconds, the film's carnage alarmed ratings boards. An adult-only classification loomed, threatening the film's release and financial survival. Verhoeven refused to soften the brutality. He trimmed only seconds from the most graphic moments, leaving the majority intact. What remained was still overwhelming. War was not depicted as heroic endurance, but as rapid, senseless destruction. This excess was not accidental. The violence wasn't there to excite, it was there to exhaust, to strip away any romantic notion of combat and replace it with shock, repetition, and loss. By refusing to aestheticize death, the film forced audiences into an uncomfortable position. You could cheer the spectacle, or you could recoil from it. But either reaction revealed something deeper: how easily extreme violence becomes acceptable when it's packaged as entertainment. Number 10. One of the film's most shocking moments isn't a battle at all. It's the destruction of Buenos Aires. The sequence feels disturbingly real because it is. Rather than relying entirely on digital effects, the filmmakers incorporated footage from an actual disaster, the Oakland Hills firestorm of 1991. Real homes burning, real neighborhoods erased, real human loss. By embedding this real-world tragedy into a fictional alien attack, the film collapses the distance between fantasy and reality. The destruction is no longer abstract. It carries weight. It feels lived in, familiar, and terrifyingly plausible. This choice was deliberate. Verhoeven wanted the audience to feel the emotional punch of catastrophe before questioning its cause. The film presents humanity as an innocent victim of sudden aggression. Only later does it quietly reveal how incomplete that story really is. In that moment, spectacle becomes manipulation, grief becomes fuel, and mass destruction becomes the perfect justification for endless war. Number 11. The propaganda reels scattered throughout the film are its most important weapon. Quick cuts, smiling soldiers, cheerful slogans, children participating in violence as if it were a game. Each segment ends with the same invitation: would you like to know more? These sequences are modeled directly after real-world wartime newsreels. Their rhythm is fast, their tone confident, their message simple. There is no room for doubt, reflection, or empathy, only participation. What makes them unsettling is how effective they are. Many viewers laughed at them, others absorbed them without resistance. Some didn't even recognize them as satire at all. That confusion is the point. The film doesn't announce its critique, it embeds it. If you find yourself enjoying the propaganda, the movie isn't judging you, it's revealing something about how easily messaging bypasses critical thought when it's packaged as entertainment. You're not just watching these reels, you're being trained by them. Number 12. The visual language of Starship Troopers pulls heavily from real authoritarian imagery. Uniforms echo historical fascist designs. Architecture favors scale, symmetry, and dominance. Order is presented as beauty, discipline as virtue. This was not subtle, and it was never meant to be. Verhoeven, who grew up under Nazi occupation, recreated these aesthetics with intention. He believed that openly labeling fascism as evil would make audiences dismiss it. Instead, he chose to show how seductive it could appear when stripped of its consequences. Even cast members questioned the imagery. When one actor asked why the film seemed to glorify fascism, Verhoeven's response was simple: if you make fascism look ugly, people reject it immediately. If you make it look clean, powerful, and efficient, people lean in. The film dares the audience to recognize that reaction in themselves, not through lectures, but through attraction. Number 13. On the surface, Starship Troopers presents a simple narrative. Humanity is attacked. Civilization is threatened. War becomes inevitable. But buried beneath the propaganda is a quieter truth. The bugs did not strike first. In the film's expanded backstory, human colonists ignored quarantine zones and settled on planets already inhabited by the arachnids. These were not defensive outposts. They were acts of expansion. trespassing framed as progress, occupation rewritten as destiny. The meteor that destroys Buenos Aires is treated as proof of alien aggression, yet the film never confirms it as an intentional attack. What it does show again and again is how quickly a single catastrophe can erase context. History is simplified. Responsibility is reassigned. The narrative is locked. The soldiers believe they are protecting humanity. In reality, they are enforcing it. The enemy isn't mindless violence from the outside. It's the story told to justify violence from within. Number 14. Early test screenings exposed just how dangerous the film's ambiguity was. Some audiences laughed nervously at the propaganda segments, sensing the satire. Others cheered them openly, repeating slogans and embracing the film's militaristic energy without irony. The studio panicked. Notes flooded in, urging the filmmakers to clarify the tone. Was this comedy? Action? Political satire? Executives feared that viewers wouldn't understand the message at all. Verhoeven refused to explain. For him, confusion wasn't a flaw, it was the experiment. The film was designed to trap audiences inside the propaganda it depicted. If viewers couldn't tell whether they were supposed to laugh or salute, that discomfort was intentional. The movie wasn't asking what you thought about fascism. It was watching how you reacted when fascism looked fun. Few films dare to let their audience misread them on purpose. Starship Troopers depended on it. Number 15. When the film was released in 1997, most critics missed the point entirely. Reviews dismissed it as shallow, excessive, or morally irresponsible. Some accused it of glorifying the very ideology it was meant to dismantle. The irony was devastating. A satire about how easily propaganda is mistaken for truth was being condemned for that exact misunderstanding. The backlash hurt the film's box office and damaged Verhoeven's standing in Hollywood. Yet time did what opening weekends could not. As years passed, audiences revisited the film with distance and context. Scholars began teaching it as political satire. The propaganda reels became case studies. The questions it raised felt uncomfortably relevant in a world increasingly shaped by media-driven conflict. What once looked like failure revealed itself as foresight. The film didn't change, the audience did. And in that shift lies the final proof of Starship Troopers' power, not as a war movie, but as a mirror that waited patiently for viewers to catch up. Number 16. By every traditional metric, Starship Troopers should have been a hit. It had a massive budget, cutting-edge visual effects, non-stop action, and a marketing campaign that sold it as pure spectacle. But when it reached theaters, the response was cold. Many critics treated it as a failure of taste rather than intent. Reviews labeled it one-dimensional, juvenile, or morally empty. Some argued it was dangerous, accusing the film of celebrating violence instead of questioning it. What they failed to recognize was that the film was staging a test, not delivering a sermon. It didn't explain its politics because explanation would have weakened the experiment. Instead, it relied on the audience to interrogate their own reactions. That misunderstanding didn't just hurt the movie's reputation, it marked a turning point in Paul Verhoeven's Hollywood career. The director, who had once been trusted with enormous budgets, suddenly found himself viewed as unreliable, even reckless. The industry moved on, but the film didn't disappear, it waited. Number 17. Commercially, Starship Troopers was labeled a disappointment. Its global box office barely justified its production and marketing costs. To the studio, it was proof that audiences wanted simpler stories and clearer heroes. Yet, the film's real life began after its theatrical run ended. On VHS, DVD, and late-night cable, it found viewers who weren't constrained by opening week expectations. Freed from hype, they began to notice the irony, the exaggeration, and the deliberate discomfort. Lines once taken seriously became absurd. The propaganda reels revealed their intent. What had felt excessive now felt intentional. Slowly, the film transformed into a cult object. Not because it was misunderstood, but because it rewarded reevaluation. Each viewing stripped away another layer of surface-level spectacle and exposed the machinery beneath. The movie didn't fail its audience. It simply arrived before they were ready. Number 18. As the years passed, Starship Troopers entered classrooms instead of multiplexes. Film professors dissected its structure. Political theorists analyzed its imagery. Students were asked a simple but unsettling question: were you cheering for the heroes or for the system that created them? After major real-world conflicts reshaped public discourse around war and media, the film's warnings felt less exaggerated and more prophetic. Its portrayal of blind nationalism, endless conflict, and simplified enemies mirrored headlines rather than parodying them. What once seemed cartoonish now felt precise. The film's greatest achievement wasn't predicting the future, but revealing a pattern that never went away. In that sense, Starship Troopers didn't age into relevance. It had been relevant all along, waiting for reality to catch up. Number 19. Starship Troopers did not end in 1997. It mutated. Animated series, direct-to-video sequels, and later CGI adaptations kept returning to the same universe, each one rougher, cheaper, and more openly violent than the last. The glossy propaganda sheen of the original slowly eroded, replaced by exhaustion, cynicism, and endless conflict. In the animated series, soldiers were wounded, lost, and psychologically worn down. Victories felt temporary, missions never truly ended. Even when familiar characters returned in later films, they were older, scarred, and trapped in a war that no longer pretended to be noble. These follow-ups were often dismissed as inferior, but they unintentionally reinforced the original film's thesis. Fascism does not collapse on its own. It adapts. It survives through repetition. It keeps sending new bodies into old wars. The franchise became its own commentary. The war against the bugs never ends because systems built on conflict cannot afford peace. Number 20. Over time, fans didn't just watch Starship Troopers. They stepped inside it. Video games, arcade machines, and spin-offs allowed players to become part of the mobile infantry. They pulled the trigger. They followed orders. They fought endless waves of enemies without questioning why the war continued. That participation completed the cycle the film warned about. What began as satire transformed into interaction. The line between critique and immersion blurred even further. Players weren't asked to reflect. They were asked to deploy. The film had always suggested this outcome. When violence is framed as duty and enemies are reduced to targets, engagement feels natural, even fun, and that may be the most unsettling legacy of all. Bonus. For Paul Verhoeven, Starship Troopers marked both a peak and an exit. Hollywood gave him a massive budget, and he used it to construct one of the most dangerous blockbusters of its era, a film that disguised critique as celebration and dared audiences to misunderstand it. When critics did exactly that, the system turned on him. Big budgets disappeared, trust evaporated. Verhoeven returned to Europe, making smaller films that were sharper, clearer, and no longer interested in hiding their intentions. Ironically, the film that damaged his career outlived most of the blockbusters that replaced it. Quoted, studied, and debated decades later, Starship Troopers remains relevant not because it glorified war, but because it revealed how easily war can be sold. It doesn't ask you to hate fascism. It asks you to notice when you're tempted by it. And once you see that, the mirror doesn't stop working.